Good morning and welcome to our panel, Gender, Race, and Money in Politics, Campaigning as a Woman. I'm Grace Haley, the Gender and Race Researcher at OpenSecrets, and today we are pleased to bring you a conversation on the systemic barriers that exist for women running for office and how they will inform those trying to elect a more representative body of government. It is my pleasure to introduce 5 women who are leading the gender and politics field in their advocacy, expertise, and research. On our panel, we have A'shanti Gholar, who is the president of Emerge and is the founder of the Brown Girls Guide to Politics. Jennifer Lim, who is the co-founder and executive director of Republican Women for Progress. Sanbonmatsu, who is a professor of political science at Rutgers University and senior scholar at the Center for American Women in Politics. And Mariel Padilla, who is a reporter at the 19th News. And Sarah Bryner, who is our director of research and strategy at OpenSecrets and will be moderating our panel today. Before we begin today's panel, I'd like to thank Keisha Gaskins-Nathan and the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, whose support made this panel possible. And please don't hesitate to ask any questions you may have for our panelists using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And at the end of the panel, we hope to have some time for your questions. And with that, I am thrilled to hand it over to Sarah.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Grace, and thank you all for being here with us today. I am very honored to have the opportunity to have this conversation with these fabulous, accomplished women to talk about these really important and significant issues facing our democracy. So to dive right in, like I said, we're just so excited to have everyone here. And I'd like to give you all a little space to just talk about yourself and your background, and then to share anything that's kind of on your mind and exciting about the work that you're doing in this space right now. So I'll go to Mariel first.
Hi, thanks again so much for having me be here on this panel. So I'm a general assignment reporter at the 19th News, and we are a fairly new, we just launched last year, a fairly new news outlet, and we focus on the intersection between gender, politics, and policy. So we have been focused on the 2020 elections, the pandemic and its impact on women, and we have reporters who work more closely with local and state news.
Would you like to go next?
Sure. So I'm Sanbonmatsu. I'm a senior scholar at the Center for American Women in Politics, and I'm a professor of political science. And at the center, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary Research and Education Center on women candidates, elected officials, and we have historical information going back through U.S. history on women's political participation. Most recently, I've had the opportunity to collaborate with OpenSecrets, formerly National Institute on Money in Politics. So the center has been collaborating on this topic with the support of Pivotal Ventures and with my colleague at the center, Claire Gothrow, who's our research associate, and graduate student Kathleen Rogers. We've been doing a series of reports related to money in politics focused on the state level. And so this kind of accompanies some of the incredible research that Sarah and Grace have been doing at the Center for Responsive Politics. And we're happy to join this conversation and talk a bit about what we're finding at the state level, where I think we tend to focus at the federal level, have less of a sense of what's happening in the states. And so I'd like to share some of that today. So thanks for having me. It's great to be part of the panel.
Hi, everyone. I'm A'shanti Gholar. I am the president of Emerge. Thank you so much for having me today. At Emerge, we focus on recruiting and training Democratic women to run for office. We started our first affiliate in 2002, Emerge California. Our national organization was created in 2005, and we currently are in 27 states. What makes us unique and different is that we do have a state focus. We know that running for office is different in each and every state. So we train women to run for office where they are, and they get to do it in a cohort of like-minded women who also want to run for office and change their communities. To date, we have trained over 4,500 women to run for office. Half of them have been elected to office at some point, and we currently have over 1,000 alums who are serving in office, including Deb Holland, our first Indigenous Cabinet Secretary, who we are so proud of. With our goals going forward, we celebrated 15 years in 2020. We have emerged 2035. A key tenet of that is focusing on the women of the new American majority: Black, Brown, and Indigenous women, women of color, young women, unmarried women, and LGBTQ women. When we look to the future of this country, they are going to be a majority. And especially when we look to 2020, they weren't just the voters who helped deliver so many Democratic victories, they were also some of the most exciting candidates on the ballot. So we are doubling down on our efforts to make sure that we are preparing these women to run for office now and not into the future. We are focusing on lift as you climb. We have 1,000 alums in office, as I mentioned, and we have so many of them that are running for higher office. So making sure that we are helping women climb up the ladder. We don't believe in you have to bloom where you're planted. We want everyone to grow. And when they do run for a higher office, make sure that they're reaching back and recruiting an Emerge alum to run for their seat, because that is how we continue to make progress. And the third piece is repowering political structures, which is what we do best at Emerge. We know that there are so many state legislatures that have become majority women. And when we look at the top 10, Emerge has affiliates in 9 out of 10 of those states. And Nevada, Colorado, Oregon, New Mexico have majority woman chambers due to Emerge alums. So we're going to keep up that work also with city councils. The Boston City Council is majority women, women of color due to Emerge alums, and also continue to flip seats. And while we do focus on recruiting and training women to run for office, we know that the entire political ecosystem is important. So making sure that we also have Emerge alums who are looking to be the campaign managers, the senior staff in the office of Emerge alums when they're elected, because we have to make sure that we have representation everywhere.
Jennifer.
Hi there. Sorry, I had a few technical difficulties. But yes, no, if you haven't heard of us, Republican Women for Progress, we actually started in 2016 as Republican Women for Hillary. So we've been disgruntled Republican women since then. And our mission these days, in 2017, we became Republican Women for Progress. Obviously after the results of the election, because there was such a groundswell of Republican women like us who didn't like the direction of the Republican Party. So we became Republican Women for Progress, and our mission now is to elevate Republican women as thought leaders, especially as the future leaders of the Republican Party, as they should be. We'll talk about that later, whether they are or not. The second part of our mission is to build the pipeline of Republican women who are going to run for office. And we do train a lot of Republican women at every level of government. And finally, we do a lot of work on reforming the GOP. And actually, one of my colleagues is on a panel tomorrow about if you're working from the inside of the Republican Party, how can we drive the future of the Republican Party away from what it is now. So that's kind of who we are these days. And we're looking forward to this discussion today.
I'm gonna actually start with you, Jennifer, because I think that some of us might remember the 1992 Year of the Woman. We've talked about the 2018 Year of the Woman again. And then people have referred to 2020 as the year of the Republican woman due to some successful Republican women campaigns at the congressional level. However, levels of representation for women, particularly Republican women, are still very low in our legislative bodies at all levels. So my starter question for you and then for everyone is why? Why do we still have to talk about Year of the Woman?
Yes, well, and especially when you're talking about Republican women, you know, even though 2020 was moving in the right direction, there's so much work that needs to be done, especially structurally. Obviously, 2020 was way better than 2018. You know, in 2018, we always like to say there were more Gregs and Mikes in the House Republican Conference than there were women, and luckily we had, you know, a lot of Republican women run in 2020, but you know, the underlying piece that I think a lot of people aren't focusing on, and especially the Republican Party isn't really focused on. I think a lot of Republicans are like, oh, great, like look at all these great Republican women who ran. But we still have the issue of this cultural issue of Republicans not thinking that women need specific help to actually have an equal opportunity to run for office and win. And you know, that's kind of why the Republican Party is still hesitant to come out and say, you know, oh, we don't really need more women. We don't have a problem. Look at all these great Republican women who ran. But what's not being really talked about is, you know, a lot of them didn't have the support structures. You know, if you're a Democratic woman, you have these, you know, if you're thinking about running for office, you can go to Emerge or Emily's List or all of these amazing organizations. But the problem with the Republican Party is, you know, Democratic women about 40 years ago realized that their party wasn't going to help them over this hump. And Republican women still haven't realized that their party isn't going to help them. And so we just don't have the support structures outside of the party. And, you know, if the party isn't focusing on electing Republican women and understanding their necessity as Republican women, and outside organizations that are supposed to be representing Republican women are actually representing the party, not so much Republican women. So still in 2021, we have the same number of Republican women's groups, and very few of them actually help Republican women as opposed to the party. So
A'shanti, from the other side of the sort of political spectrum, what's your answer to that question?
Yeah, so I can tell a little story. Yesterday, a woman who I spoke to about 2 years ago now graduated from our Emerge California program. And I met her when I was doing a speaking engagement encouraging women to run for office. And at that event, everyone was telling me, A'shanti, it's just so hard. And then I go back to the basics of what I tell all women. We are playing in a political system that was not built for us. This system was built for white land owning men. They never anticipated the participation of women. They most certainly never anticipated the participation of people of color. So every time that we put our name on the ballot, we are disrupting a system that wasn't meant for us. And a lot of people, all these hundreds of years later, still have a problem with that. And that is what lead us to these terms, electable, viable. Like, I can't stand those terms. I really can't, because what you're saying is straight white man. And that leads us to why we still have this problem today, is that they are still seen as the perfect people to govern us, the perfect people to tell us what we need in our lives. And when we just look at women running for office, you know, we recently commemorated 100 years of the 19th Amendment, but we got to be honest, it wasn't 100 years for all women. It was 100 years for some women. It was 1965 and after that we really saw women of color, Black, brown, Indigenous women, being able to actively participate in our government. So that's a part of why you see so many more women of color running now, is because we haven't had 100 years. We really haven't had all that time. So we have to get out of this mindset of who is the perfect candidate, who can win these districts. I can't stand when people tell me women aren't electable. They clearly are. There's some serving in office. There's people voting for them. But when we have the gatekeepers, the power players who continue to keep that type of narrative going, it hurts women. So that's why it's so important that we're having this discussion, that we have these women's organizations, that we have the work being done at the 19th and with CAWP, because we still have to dispel so many of those myths. And as women who have the seat at the table to disrupt the system some more, we got to be loud and we got to be really vocal about it.
Thank you for that. And thank you for mentioning CAWP, who's done some really great research, particularly extending to the state level and local candidates and building that pipeline. So Kira, would you like to speak to that?
Sure. Yeah, just to piggyback on what Jennifer and A'shanti were saying, you know, our work has shown that men and women take somewhat different paths to office. And of course, there are these informal gatekeepers at play in both parties. And so these organizations are critical. I think that changing the mindset of the gatekeepers is part of the story. It's also changing women's minds about what is possible. And I think what we have seen with the success of women, particularly in the past 2 cycles, and the historic numbers that we've reported at the center for nominees, for office holders, we're at record-breaking statistics on several fronts. But it's not a problem that's going to be solved in one cycle. Right? Because even with all of this, as Sarah was saying, the Year of the Woman media frame, well, that yields, we still haven't had a woman president. We are at 26.5% of members of Congress, women of color in statewide executive positions, governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state. 6% of those office holders are women of color. So there's so much work to be done. And I think that organizationally, that is organizations are helping drive women's success. And so women have had to form networks and mentor each other, as has been said. And I think that that is what is helping boost these numbers, and that work has to continue in order to reach parity.
And on that media frame, Mariel, is that something that you and your colleagues at the 19th are challenging, or do you find that structuring conversations around sort of Year of the Woman, look at all these success stories, is that sort of a more productive conversation?
I think it's definitely important that we acknowledge progress when progress is made. And I think that there has been major, steps made in recent years, but I mean, everyone we talk to, including legislators and people running for office and people working in the campaign space, everyone acknowledges that there's so much work still to be done. And so the focus is kind of not on losing that momentum when it comes to breaking down systemic barriers, trying to reach more gender parity, especially when it comes to our leaders. And I just want to piggyback off of what everyone was saying about this electability myth. And we've actually found anecdotally, when we're talking to women who are running for office on state and local levels, a lot of us reporters have found that these women candidates have to be asked multiple times to run because they are just less confident in their ability to lead. But even then, they are more qualified than a lot of their male counterparts. And I think a lot of that has to do with this perception of what a leader is and what a leader looks like, both from the public standpoint and also from the people running.
That's a great point about these sort of the electability myth. I like the way that that's phrased. Represent Us recently released information that at the state level, there are no significant differences in electability once you account for the factors that would lead to electability. So white men are no more likely to win their elections, all things considered, than women of color or white women or men of color. But as we all know, very few elections are decided on election day. Most elections are decided much earlier in the process because of the way that our sort of our maps are written and our system favors incumbents. I would also like to point out that white women in 2020 did better with fundraising than any other group of candidates, all things told. That starts to get a little bit murkier once you look into different racial subgroups. But being a woman, at least for fundraising, hasn't seemed to hurt people in recent cycles. I think that's a myth that people think it does, but recently it hasn't. So I wanted to ask if those findings surprise anyone. Does that sort of comport with what you see when you talk to candidates? I think I'll go back to Jennifer first for this.
So when I think that finding is so interesting because it's usually not the general that we have issues with from the side of Republican women. Republican women have so many issues getting through the primary because they're usually not the chosen one, right? There's some white guy in the wings waiting who's the chosen one always. And usually we find that the Republican Party tends to run women when they think they need another woman to run against another, like Democratic woman per se, or for instance, or they'll run a Black Republican woman against another Black Republican woman. They're usually not picking Republican women for because they're, that's the chosen candidate, right? And so Elise Stefanik famously came out and said that we have to, be supporting Republican women in the primaries with money. And that's such a severe issue still. Is just getting Republican women through the primary. And we work with about 50% of our candidates are Republican women of color. And that's a very unique fundraising challenge as well. Because usually, Republicans won't have a problem, giving money to whatever candidate gets through the primary. It's just Republican women, and especially Republican women of color, face such huge obstacles when getting through the primary level.
A'shanti, what are your thoughts from the other side of the spectrum?
Yeah, well, overall, like Jennifer said, fundraising is just harder for women in general, just period. There are people who will write a $10,000 check to a man, but only give the woman $2,500 because it goes back to them having to prove themselves first, that they're actually able to win in this district. Will people vote for you? Can you talk about their issues? Can you make it out of that primary? It really sets them back. And when we look at the gap between white women and women of color, we also have to think about how we're doing recruitment for women to run for office. Like, if the gatekeepers are recruiting women from their network, they're more likely going to be more affluent women who come from certain communities and backgrounds, who have, all of those connections. So it is going to make it a lot easier for them to raise money, but they're only dealing with the woman part of it. They're not dealing with a person of color part of it, which comes with a whole nother set of baggage. Like, women of color really have to rely on low dollar donations, and it's from other women of color, people from their church, from their college, sororities. That is really how they start to build up their fundraising. And most women will get spent 2 to 1. I've talked to Emerge alums who have been outspent 10 to 1, 20 to 1, but they still won. Because what I say is, what you don't have in money, you make up in shoe leather and a good message. And a lot of the men, they will just spend all their money on the TV ads and the lid and think oh, I got this handled. No, the woman is out there really knocking the doors and connecting to voters, being out in the community, are currently on the Zoom, meeting people where they are. So the fundraising advantage is super huge. And I know CAWP has done some great work with Higher Heights on talking about this in particular for Black women. But we also have to look at the fact, and I tell women this when they are running, is look at how much money you have to raise. For some races, it's only $5,000, $50,000. So it's also that education piece that you don't need $1 million for every single race that you're going to run. If you want to be on city council, if you want to be on your school board, if you want to be on your water board, look at what you have to raise and start with your network first, because every woman does have a network. Your Facebook is a network, your phone is a network. So start with those people. So the fundraising piece, the money piece is absolutely huge, but we need to make sure that it's not deterring women from running for office because they can overcome that barrier that exists.
I want to piggyback on that quickly and say that we did find in our most recent report that Black women Democrats were significantly outraised by compared to white women Democrats in the first year of the election cycle, which speaks to exactly what you're saying, that the kind of gatekeepers, the early major donors who can provide the veneer of viability or electability are disproportionately favoring white women over Black women. So I think that speaks to exactly the point that you're making. Mariel, have you noticed anything in conversations with candidates or in your reporting that speaks to these kind of fundraising gaps and questions of fundraising success?
Yes, a lot of the candidates that we have talked to have mentioned how most of them are not self-financing their own campaigns, whereas a lot of their competitors, especially incumbents or white males, they are more likely to self-finance their own campaigns, and that just causes extra burdens on these women that we're speaking to, obviously. And then there's the whole childcare for the ones who have children, especially young children. Not every state allocates election funding for childcare, and that puts another undue burden on women who have to figure out what to do with their children. And this makes it less possible for a lot of women to run in those states.
Kira, that kind of goes to these state and local races where we might think that they might be cheaper, that they might, be a fertile stomping ground for electing more women and women of color. Has that been something that you've noticed in your research, or is that again a misconception?
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about that. And just to underscore what A'shanti was saying, I think it is important when we talk about the area of money in politics. I don't want to put statistics out to deter anybody, because I think that is really, we have to be really careful about how we talk about these issues, because I think that the opportunities are there. And of course, the best funded candidate, as was said, doesn't always succeed. On the other hand, I think that people who are interested in this topic need to understand that if you want to move the needle on women's representation, then you have to back candidates. And that's how this works. Candidates need funds to get their message out, and you're competing with better heeled, well-heeled candidates who have stronger financial networks, who have personal wealth. So we have to be careful how we talk about this, because I think that there are opportunities. And as you said, Sarah, the idea that women of color aren't electable, that is a myth. And we have so many talented women in this country who are running, who are holding office, who are leading, and there are so many more who could be playing a role. And we just need to get them resources and get them to know they have support, because it's hard to run if you don't have support or you don't think that you can do it. So one of the things that we find in our report about governors that we put out last fall is that, when you control for other things, women are doing well. And so I think that that's an important message. And, Sarah, you showed in your new data, sometimes women are outraising men. And so, these are important facts to put out there. Of course, what we also find is that women are much less likely to enter races for governor. So, there's something there. Probably the ability to fundraise is connected to entering it all. So we're looking at women who are running. Those women are a minority of candidates. When they run, they're raising money, but they're a minority. They also are, to underscore some of the points that have already been made, we do find that women are more reliant on small contributions. We do find that women are less likely to be able to draw on personal wealth to self-finance their campaigns. Women are less likely to have $1 million or $10 million in at home to just loan themselves to back their campaigns. These statewide races can be very expensive, and races are getting more expensive in general. And we do find a race gap where women of color are raising less than white women, and they are less likely to be able to draw on personal resources. So I think that all these challenges that women face are kind of connected up with race, gender, and class. But I think that with some thought and activism, they can be closed, but it just takes knowledge and awareness of the problem.
Yeah, I think that poses an interesting question for A'shanti, which also is being asked by one of our audience members, which is, what advice do you have to give to Black women hoping to run for office? What do you think is a successful sort of message for women to get them past those hurdles of worrying that they're not going to win? How do we make the actual change happen?
The first thing is to just do it. And I think an important piece for us to talk about is, with things being so virtual now, and even before, there was just so much racism and sexism and misogyny. And that's another part of running for office that a lot of women don't want at all. And I have to tell them that the racism, the sexism, misogyny is part of the plan not to get us to run for office, to deter us from running for office, because when we don't, the status quo remains and the old dudes are all good. So letting them know that you are unfortunately going to have to deal with it, and there are organizations like Emerge to help, to train you on how to run for office, the ins and outs. And while we can't take the racism, the sexism, the misogyny out of it, we can definitely make them more competent in what it takes to run for office, make them confident on the campaign trail, and make it a lot less lonely. So many of our Emerge alums, the first thing that they will tell you is like, I never even thought about running for office. I can't even believe that I'm here being sworn in today. I literally just wanted to make the playground better. I think of London Breed, who's the first Black woman mayor of San Francisco. She will tell you that she never envisioned her being in that position, but I'm so glad that she did, because she was one of the top leaders on the pandemic. When you had the male mayors out there like, it's all good, y'all, don't worry about this, enjoy your life. She's like, nope, I'm listening to the smart people. This thing is a thing. We're about to shelter in place. And now we see San Francisco and California being one of the better states when it comes to how they dealt with the pandemic. I think about Congresswoman Lucy McBath, one of our alums. She will tell you she was just a mom, a flight attendant, and a wife. Her life changed when her son, Jordan Davis, was shot and killed for playing loud music in his car. And then she became a gun violence prevention activist, and she now leads the committee that oversees this issue. We have to be at these seats. We have to be at the decision-making table. And I tell them, if we don't, things aren't going to change. So those are my biggest pieces of advice. We can't let all of the negativity deter us, because that doesn't mean that we get a better future for our children, for our families, for our communities. We know from all the research that has been done, women are more collaborative. They co-sponsor more bills, sponsor more bills. They'll bring more money home to their district. So we need more women in office to do that. And it goes to like backing women, especially backing women of color. We know every year there are targeted list seats that can be flipped. Give money to the women of color, support the women of color, encourage other people to do it. And I'm going to stop talking because I'm talking about this all day. Another thing we have to also get rid of is the fact that people of color, women of color, can only represent districts that are predominantly people of color or women of color. That is a huge myth. And that's another reason why you don't see a lot of these women of color candidates getting backed, because people don't think that they're able to represent a district that is majority white. And that is another myth that we know is a myth, is completely untrue. So that's something else that we need to be talking about when people need to choose to back these women of color who can win these races. And yeah, 200 years and we ain't never had a Black woman governor, I'm over it. Like, I got things to say, but that's a different panel.
We don't have a Black woman senator right now. There's, I don't think we have a Black, yeah, it's, it can be very upsetting to talk about these issues every day, I'm sure. And bouncing over to Jennifer, what are the strategies on the Republican side? I think that in some ways the hurdles are even greater for Republican women of color because they have essentially no figures in Congress to point to as successful candidates right now.
Yes, well, I could listen to A'shanti all day, but Republican women of color are in a really awkward situation because there's no organization that specializes in that. You know, we're kind of the only group that I can think of that, you know, kind of helps Republican women of color specifically. And we've actually had a lot of great success stories at the state and local level of Republican women of color, even winning in Democratic areas. But we oftentimes, you know, come into contact with candidates when they already have started to run and they're already facing issues with fundraising, not understanding how to leverage their network. And some of the basic things like, how do I get a campaign website built? And a lot of these issues are specifically, you know, or particularly worse for Republican women of color because, you know, that network doesn't exist right now. And so we really try and get Republican women into training programs. So we actually have a partnership with the campaign school at Yale, and they're actually starting their summer session very shortly. And we also offer scholarships to Republican women who are attending. And one of our board members, Portia Hart, who is a Black woman who ran for state senate in Iowa, and is like the best candidate you've ever met. Obviously, you know, she was primaried by this white man from a town over. But, you know, getting her the training now and investing in training for Republican women, especially Republican women of color, is kind of something that we're doing to kind of even out that playing field. And, you know, at Republican Women for Progress, we really believe that Republican women, and especially Republican women of color, Republican women in the LGBTQ plus community, are supposed to be the future of the Republican Party. And so elevating their voices as much as we can is so critical right now, because it always riles us up. All of these, you know, events that are being held about, you know, how do we fix the GOP? It's always, you know, panels of white men, which were the problem in the first place. And so, you know, we had a panel recently, and we featured one of our LGBTQ plus board members, as well as one of our Black women candidates who won actually here in Maryland for city council. And also, you know, women of our, you know, millennials and younger who, you know, are currently this generation that the GOP isn't speaking to. Just trying to elevate all of those voices and encourage people to listen to them as opposed to the folks who got us into this mess.
Mariel, following up on that, from your reporting at the national level, have you seen any successful strategies, or have you heard from any candidates who have shared information about successful strategies for fundraising and closing the gap?
Sure. Well, every candidate is different. Every campaign and election is different, obviously. But as we've said before, what we're hearing is that there's a lot of grassroots efforts that need to happen, as opposed to several, just a few large donors. We're finding that women have to do a lot of that groundwork, finding support from their own networks first, and then the most successful ones are people who have been able to make their message resonate. And once their message resonates, so the networks naturally expand from the ground up. And that's how they get a lot of their fundraising from, you know, smaller but more donations.
Right. Absolutely. Switching over to the future, 2022 and beyond, I think that the reason that this conversation is happening over Zoom is because of the global pandemic that we have all lived, well, not all of us have all lived through. And I wanted to kind of switch to that. I think that one of the, what I have heard through reporting on this is that all of the sustained job loss after the pandemic is being carried by women of color, Black women in particular. While other people have started to get their jobs back, the economy is improving, the people left behind are women of color. And I wanted to ask Kira, sort of when we look to 2022, do you think that the pandemic, either because of this sort of contraction in resources or because of other factors, will affect the number of candidates and the successfulness of candidates running next cycle?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that what we've seen is everything that's broken in our country kind of come to the fore along race, class, public health, all these issues with the economy and COVID coming together over the last 15 months. I think that there's cause for concern about the individual personal resources and situation of women of color in the workforce and what that means for their personal finances and their ability to support themselves and their families, their ability to run for office. On the other hand, there is this issue agenda, and we've all seen, if we weren't paying attention, how important it is who is at the table, right? So we have seen that it really matters who is president, that it really matters who's governor, who's mayor, who's on city council. We have seen a lot of heated debates about what we need to do as a country around infrastructure, childcare, and the vaccine distribution. So I think that the high turnout that we saw in 2020 with the presidential election, the rise in women candidates, I think these are all really encouraging signs that people are engaged and they understand what's at stake with climate change as well. I think I do worry in terms of giving. One of the things that we find in our research, and we're going to be putting out another report in a few weeks that looks at statewide executive positions beyond governors, is that women are really underrepresented as donors. They are the majority of voters. So that, women are engaged. They are politically active. They're in both parties. They're helping elect candidates. But they are really outspent in terms of what men are giving to politics. Women of color, some research done by political scientists that estimate donor gender and race find that women of color in particular are the worst represented as donors. And so I think that is a form of political voice. And I do worry about that going forward. And we do find that in our research that women are underrepresented as donors. So this is something that we need to watch.
Absolutely. And women of color candidates receive more as a proportion of their fundraising from small donors, the exact type of donor who you might expect to have been hit by the pandemic and resulting recession. So that in particular is of concern to me, although in 2020, we saw so much support from small donors on the Democratic side, but then also as well on the Republican side. After major events like the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the conventions. So I think that there's some 2020 teaches us some surprising lessons, but are they applicable outside of the context of a global pandemic? I'm not sure. A'shanti, do you have any sort of thoughts about 2022 and fundraising and what we might expect to see?
Yeah, I'm excited about 2022. And I know we've been talking a lot about the Year of the Woman, but for me, even when people say Year of the Woman or it's a wave, I'm very clear it's a movement. This is what we have been working towards at Emerge since we were founded, having more women step up to run for office and have their seats at the table. And post 2016, we have been seeing more women run because they know there is so much at stake. A lot of people say, oh, it was Trump that inspired all these women to run, but I actually call it the Hillary effect, because women woke up the next day and they said, if not Hillary, then who? than me. It has to be me. And we saw those women running for office in 2017 and in 2018. And then in 2020, we saw women who were running because they were inspired by those women who ran in 2017 and 2018. And they saw women that looked like them. They saw Abigail Spanberger accepting her, victory with her daughter playing between her legs. They saw Katie Porter. They saw women who used to be homeless, who were bankrupt, who let situations of domestic violence, now serving in elected office. And that let them know that those women were at the forefront. Therefore, their lived experiences are going to be at the forefront, which is something that women bring to the table. And it goes back to us talking about with the fundraising piece is also getting out of the notion that it's so much money in politics. One of the reasons why Obama was so successful is because he was asking for $2, $3. My family, they were voters, but they never gave until Obama because, oh, he's only asking me for $2, $3. I can totally do that. That's not a problem. And for us to let women know how far that $2, $3 can really go. Because when we pile up our $5, our $15, our $100, we are more powerful than any billionaire out there. We're the ones who are really getting the people elected to office who are going to make a change. So it's us also developing that culture of giving amongst women, just how you can give to your church, just how you can give to other entities. You can invest in a candidate as well. Like make that investment in you. And I remember when I wrote my first $50 check, I was like, this is my manicure, my pedicure. I really like this candidate. But that candidate went on to win their race and they were highly effective. So I was able to see just how giving up that manicure and pedicure money actually made a change in the community. And I encourage women, just start to set a small line item in your budget. It doesn't have to be much to start giving to candidates. So that's part of the way of how we transform that culture and help these women who are running in 2022 and beyond onto victory.
I want to switch to a couple questions we have from our audience members. One, and I think I'm going to direct this to you, Jennifer, first, but we'll welcome feedback from others as well. What role do you think that training programs realistically play in disrupting the system?
Well, I think, I don't think any men wake up in the morning and think, I need to get into that training program before I run for office. But I think that's such a secret weapon when it comes to women running for office, because, they do need to make up for, not automatically having that network that's going to assume they can win and give them a bunch of checks. So we, at Republican Women for Progress, we think that's why we've had this 3-year partnership with the campaign school at Yale, is because there are a lot of people who say they train candidates, and it's really important, I think, to invest in a real intensive campaign training program. And Patty Rousseau, who is on today, who's the executive director there. I always say that all of my friends, Republican or Democrat, who've won their election have gone to the campaign school at Yale. So, and there are other good campaign training programs out there, but I think just, that's why, we give out scholarships to women every year, is, in investing in that on the front end, you can avoid making some mistakes and, wasting money the first time around, whether it's, hiring the wrong campaign manager or, not understanding how to fundraise with your network. So I really feel like for Republican women, especially who don't have that background and that culture in wanting to join training programs and prioritizing that, I think that's one of the secret weapons to, get to parity on the Republican women's side.
Great points, thank you. We have another audience question from Nora. Do you think that there are challenges, and I'm going to direct this to you, Kira, are there specific challenges for women running as independents as opposed to Democrats and Republicans? We've talked a lot about Democrats and Republicans. Most of my research has been focused on the two parties just because there's more candidates in those parties. But do we have a space for people who are outside of the kind of two major US parties?
I think it's really difficult because of our electoral rules that favor the two parties. And so I think that it's really beneficial for women to run with the party. I mean, it's unfortunately, we're in a very polarized situation right now. There isn't a lot of middle ground in American politics these days. So I know that running without the parties is appealing, and you know, the candidates who can do that, and that's easier in some states than others, I give them a lot of credit. But it is just really hard with our rules. You know, we don't have proportional representation. If you vote for a third party candidate, it's first past the post here that isn't going to transfer to a share of seats in Congress. So it's very hard, and I think the two parties really have a monopoly.
Mariel, do you think that the redistricting is going to have any effect here on what we see next cycle?
In regards to this discussion on independent, Republican, Democratic?
Independent, Republican, Democrat, or just women and women of color broadly?
It's hard to say what impact this pandemic have on 2022. It's just too early to tell, I think, especially from our vantage point as reporters. I will say that we've been seeing a lot of candidates who are using their lived experiences through this pandemic to talk about why they should lead and lead to these issues that I think have been you know, exposed because of the pandemic. So I do think that 2022 is going to see a different type of campaign and leadership, because I mean, the public is ready for something different.
Yes, I think we all are ready for something different. I want to ask, sort of maintain a little bit of moderator's prerogative here and ask everyone for their most, what makes you optimistic? What have you seen last cycle, 10 years ago, recently, that really made you think, look, we're gonna change this. This is not all doom and gloom. We can do this in our lifetimes. And I'm going to start with A'shanti for that.
So one of the things that I'm just really proud of is our recent event that we did called Emerge Across America, where we highlighted our affiliates and our alums, and just to see all of the success. So when someone says, do training programs work? Yes, you can go to our YouTube channel and watch that event. There was a powerful conversation between Danica Rome and Brianna Titone, who are two open transgender women state legislators, and we're proud to have them be Emerge alums. There was a conversation between Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley and Liz Miranda, and the Congresswoman mentored Liz. And you just have all of these amazing stories of women who decided to run for office and make change. But what makes me really excited, and why I love Emerge and why I've been so committed to this network since 2006 as a co-founder and founding board member of Emerge Nevada, is the network of support. And that support is really the key to making change, and it's fundamental to what we do at Emerge. You get training, but we are with you the minute you graduate from our training program. Like, our alums know that they can call me and be like, Shanti, they sending out all these emails, but I ain't got my PAC check yet. And I will call up that organization and be like, I need you to run her money. Like, you sending out these emails. So what are we doing in that really supportive way? And that's what makes Emerge so successful, and our training program so successful, and our alums successful. And I'm just really excited for what's to come for the future of our organization.
So, you know, on the Republican women's side, we're in a tricky spot right now. I think when Trump lost, kind of everybody in our space thought that, you know, we'd be in a different place right now in terms of what the future of the Republican Party looked like. As everybody here knows, there wasn't that broad realization that we have to move on from Trump. He still has quite a strong hold on the party. And so, it makes looking towards the future a little tough because, we wonder, what does it look like come 2022 and beyond? Are we going to support another Democrat for president? Maybe. So kind of, I think what keeps us going, though, is all of the amazing Republican women that we meet who do want to change the narrative of the GOP. We have a transgender candidate right now who's in a neck and neck race for committee woman. We have, we've had several candidates who were, publicly harassed by their local Republican Party, and they still beat out the chosen Republican candidate, who was a white man, of course. We have Black Republican women running and winning at the state and local level. And so I think, meeting and interacting with and being on the journey that these candidates go through is so emotional, and you see what these women are investing in changing the narrative. And I think that is definitely what keeps us going and makes us optimistic about the future. Seeing this next generation of Republicans who are, starting to question the status quo, and definitely questioning where, what if we keep on this path of Trump, where does that lead us? So hopefully we will have some victories from the progressive Republican women's side in 2022 and beyond.
Mariel.
Yeah, I love this question about optimism. I feel like, kind of backing up more broadly, the 19th looks at all sorts of gender issues, especially related to politics and policy. But I think that there's a lot of hope in all of these stories. There's definitely a lot of doom and gloom, especially with the pandemic that, showed all of these broken systems that disproportionately impact women and women of color especially. But for every story about a broken system, there are hundreds of stories about women being resilient and trying to find ways to overcome these barriers. And I think that there's a lot of hope in that. Outside of politics, I've talked to women who are retired and aging, but starting their own businesses and learning how to stand on their own this later stage in life. Fortune 500 list just came out, and we've made records this year on how many women are leading 500 companies. And I've talked to legislators who are educators, and they ran specifically to make changes for their school districts. And these women have been successful. And I think that diversity begets diversity. And I think that there is definitely hope in more women entering spaces that they haven't been before and making way for women after them.
Great. Kira.
I think for me, one of the things that was most striking is because I've watched CAWP's state legislative numbers for women holding state legislative office across 50 states for many years and written on that level of office, that we finally moved the needle, the country moved the needle on that statistic after the 2018 election. We've been hovering around 22, 24%, which is really not very much for what's often an entry-level political office. And today we're at 30.6%, I think, of women in state legislatures. Nevada, women are 60% of the legislature, right? Majority female. So if you think about, that just opens up all kinds of possibilities when you think that women could be the majority. I mean, they are the majority of the voters. They could be the majority of the legislature. They could be the majority of Congress. So I think that those numbers were really exciting.
That is, thank you for sharing that. It's so great to hear. We can all move to Nevada and support those politicians. I wanted to give everyone a chance to just share with the audience before we wrap up how they can support your work. And so I'll start again with Jennifer.
Hello. Well, yes. I was thinking about what A'shanti said earlier. I think one of the most important things that you can do for us is that Republican woman that you know who you think would be a much better candidate than what we're seeing now. Please encourage her to run. You can send her to us and we'll give her a good pep talk, get her into some campaign training. But also, what A'shanti was saying, we see this all the time on the Republican women's side is there isn't that culture of giving, and Republican women especially depend on those small dollar donations. And so that's something that I've been trying to do personally, and we've encouraged our organization to do the same. Is all these women that we're interacting with and supporting, making sure we donate to all of their campaigns and starting to build that culture within the Republican women's side. And yes, just I think all these organizations that are on this call today, and last year, 2020 and 2021 are tough years for fundraising. So, if there's an organization you see that's doing great work, kind of on that same path of, creating that culture of donating, make sure you donate to that organization. I try and do that as well. My husband and I have a list of all our organizations at the end of the year that we make sure to donate to. So, yes, in the candidate space and in the nonprofit space, just make sure you're supporting the change you want to see.
Thank you. A'shanti?
So for Emerge, you can visit us at emergeamerica.org. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Emerge America, and also there on YouTube. You can always find our trainings that are going on, the list of our alums that are running for office, and on our YouTube channel, we have great conversations with alums. So you can share those with the women in your life who are thinking about running for office and need that extra push. We mentioned earlier in the introduction, I also do the Brown Girl's Guide to Politics, which is my love letter to other women of color in politics to encourage them to get involved. And if you're interested in hearing more about how the pandemic has impacted women of color, that's going to be the next season of the podcast. So we're talking about vaccinations, we're talking about the She Session, we're going to be talking to Congresswoman Grace Ming about all the Asian hate that has happened. So if you want to find out more about that, you can subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Thank you so much. Mariel?
So the 19th is a nonprofit news site, which means we are free to read and free to republish. So I would just encourage you to read from our site and share and subscribe to the newsletter if you're interested in getting some 19th stories in your inbox.
Great. And I would just say that Grace was kind enough to put our website in the chat earlier. Please visit our website. We have a lot of data that you might be looking for, research analysis. And we also, CAWP runs a program called Ready to Run, which is a bipartisan campaign training program in New Jersey and many other states. So if you're looking for a training program, please keep us in mind as well.
I'd like to say thank you to all of our panelists. This was fantastic. I feel so honored to be among this group of women. I'd like to say thank you to our attendees. This panel was recorded. If you'd like to share it, we will be, go to OpenSecrets.org and you'll be able to access the link there once we get it up. So I'd like to say thank you again. I hope everyone has a fantastic week on this, at least where I am, sunny June morning. So thank you so much again.